This is chapter 47, which means there will be exactly 100 more episodes of Everdark to go. This story is 147 chapters, but that is not the end. Everdark Academy is currently being written and posted on wraithrain.com, chapter by chapter, and when that's done, I'll just go on to the next story in the Everdark world, so you don't have to be afraid of getting to the end. I'm planning much more to come.
Last on Everdark, Damon and Julian had a romantic morning together. Both of them exposed some of the fears that they have. Julian fears losing himself to Damon, and Damon realizes that things are not as he thought they were with the Immortals. But both of them find the ultimate comfort in one another. Now we turn back to Balthazar and Christian. Everdark, Episode 47, Slow Burn. Oh, my head, Balthazar groaned. He flopped down on his back on his bed, feet hanging off the edge, one hand covering his forehead where the constant throbbing seemed to emanate from. He had a bag of blood in his other hand, hoping that drinking something untainted by corpse powder might stop the unending banging that seemed to be going on with his brain. He closed his eyes and tried to ignore the first headache he'd had in 200 years.
Let that be a lesson to you. Anything that has corpse powder in it, don't drink,
Christian said with an amused lilt in his voice. He thought that his fledgling would be more judgmental about his drinking, but Christian just seemed amused by the after effects of it. That was good. Balthazar was the indulgent type of all sorts of things, corpse powder merely being the latest. The sad thing is that while I agree with you, Christian, I know myself all too well. At some point, I will forget this pain and seek out that cognac again, Balthazar said with startling honesty. He heard a choking laugh coming from the direction of his bathroom. He wasn't sure what Christian was doing in there, but there was some rustling. He had expected that after Christian had helped him to his room, that the young man would abandon him for sleep in his own bedroom. Yet he still had to call the chef and make arrangements for the dinner, which would be made easier if he could question Christian about his parents' likes and dislikes. But his fledgling didn't like to make things easy on him, and the fact that he had waited until the last minute to plan this, well, he sort of felt he was getting what he deserved, even if the Vampire King had been the one to drag him out on this very informative and, dare he say it, fun adventure.
I can understand why you want to get drunk every once in a while. You just forgot what happens afterwards, that's all.
Being a mortal means experiencing pain as well as pleasure in equal measures. We immortals can have more fun in some ways, but I do think sometimes, because our pain threshold is so much higher, that our pleasure threshold is too, Balthazar admitted. He didn't open his eyes, but he was acutely aware that Christian was sitting on the edge of the bed right by him, on his bed, not going away. He felt Christian tugging at his hand, the hand that had the blood bag in it.
You should drink this. It might help your head,
Christian suggested. Balthazar made a whining sound, but he raised the blood bag to his lips and bit off the top before draining it in one swallow. I would offer to feed you, Christian, but I'm afraid my blood would poison you right now. Another chuckle from his usually humorless fledgling was a reward.
I'm actually fine. You just focus on recovering.
Christian then did this amazing thing. He touched Balthazar's shoulder and squeezed it gently. It was a tender touch, a touch of affection. It was not forced and it was not tentative. There was no hesitation to it. Balthazar's heart leapt up into his throat. He risked cracking open an eyelid and glancing over at Christian. His fledgling was exactly where he had pictured him, which was perched on the edge of his bed just half a foot away. Christian was gazing down at him with a rather indulgent look on his face. When he saw that Balthazar's eyes were opened, he smiled. Despite his massive headache, Balthazar felt like singing. Then Christian started speaking again, and he felt like he'd been baited and switched.
Sophia wants a cat. 2 cats.
Christian said.
And I think I'd like one as well. Maybe a Russian blue, or a Scottish fold, or an American shorthair, or...
Cats. Balthazar rocketed upwards only to let out a groan as it felt like his brain had turned to liquid in his skull and sloshed when he moved. He put both hands up to his temples and squeezed as he shut his eyes again tightly. What are you talking about? Can't have those animals. They aren't clean. There was a delighted laugh from Christian, as if he'd expected no other answer.
Actually, cats are very clean, and...
No. They track litter everywhere, and they lick their own butts, and then they lick you. More than that, they're... The bitter, coppery taste of fear rose in his throat, and he remembered his sister's cat that had pooped on his pillow and attacked his ankles. They're evil.
You did not just say cats are evil. The brave Lord Ravenscroft is afraid of fluffy kittens?
Christian's teasing was gentle, but pointed.
You just went up against warrior skeletons.
He scowled without opening his eyes, because his head really did still hurt, though the blood had taken some of the throbbing away. I have lived for over 200 years, Christian. I know more about anything than you do simply from having existed longer. So when I say that cats are evil, I mean it. None shall enter Ravenscroft Manor, ever.
Sophia sees the future.
Christian pointed out slowly.
I don't think she'd ask for something she knew she wasn't going to get.
Balthazar opened his eyes again and cast an alarmed look at his fledgling. Christian had a point. Sophia did see the future, and she did know when certain things were to come to pass. Was his house to be infested with furry felines? No. This must be some kind of cosmic joke. She would not ask for the one animal that he could not abide. You don't like cats, do you, Christian? Balthazar asked. Christian had mentioned something about wanting a cat of his own, but he must have misheard that.
I was never allowed to have any pets. Not because my parents disliked animals or anything like that, but because they're both allergic, so we couldn't have a dog or cat. I did have some fish once, but those don't count. I admit that I've always wanted a cat,
Christian said with a shrug. Oh, I see.
You don't sound pleased,
Christian said, with a smile twitching at his lips. I was just imagining it for a moment. You and Fluffy, that's a cat's name, isn't it? Cuddled on the couch while I have to stand on the other side of the room from the deadly animal. You and Fluffy in bed together with her curled up behind your knees so that I must stand in the door to your bedroom and go no farther. You feeding Fluffy from the table and cooing over her, Balthazar said. Christian's smile was growing wider and wider as he spoke.
I see that Fluffy is a Balthazar deterrent.
Balthazar immediately scowled. Don't act as if that makes the cat more attractive. I will be quite hurt if you do. Truly. Christian rose from the bed, and Balthazar had a moment of panic. Was this cat so important to Christian? Was he annoyed by his refusal? But Christian appeared quite at ease, and not upset at all.
You need to call the chef,
Christian reminded him.
By the way, my mother and father adore prime rib, so that'd be a good choice for dinner. They're both fond of wine, white or red, but my mother adores champagne. My father hates green vegetables. I don't know why. It is completely and utterly ridiculous, but there it is. Otherwise, they're adventurous eaters, and I'm sure any chef you know will put together something delicious for them.
Balthazar blinked. Were they off the subject of cats? Was he so lucky that Christian would just drop this matter and somehow it would fade into the ether? After all, Christian had just told him exactly what the chef should make that night for dinner with no cat threats.
Why don't you call the chef while I draw a bath for you?
Christian started towards the bathroom door. Balthazar was swallowing, but he found himself saying, Will you be staying to take a bath too? Christian paused in the bathroom's doorway, and then slowly he turned his head to the side to look back over his shoulder at Balthazar.
Can I have a cat?
Christian asked. Balthazar felt like his throat was being squeezed by a very tight vice, but he got out in a wheezy, strained whisper. We can discuss it. Christian nodded his head sagely, and then went into the bathroom without answering whether he would be staying or not, to get wet and warm with Balthazar. Balthazar jumped to his feet. His head felt like it exploded, and he had to close his eyes tightly for a moment. But after a time, the world stopped spinning sickly, and he reached for his cell phone that he'd set to charging on the nightstand. If he could handle the dinner plans quickly, maybe he could somehow convince Christian to stay for just a little while. The thought of asking Christian to wash his back was more than a little intriguing. But would that push his reluctant fledgling too far, too fast? He didn't know. He would have to read the situation. Now that he knew about David, he understood so much more about Christian. He wished that David was still alive, so he could kill him. He dialed Michael Anders' phone number and got a very bleary-sounding chef. He started to rattle off exactly what he needed, which had the chef barking at him to be quiet for a moment. He needed to wake up, or otherwise he was going to treat this as a very bad dream and go back to bed. Finally, though, Michael was focused with laser-like intensity regarding this dinner party. He understood that it needed to be perfect. Balthazar related everything that Christian had told him about his parents' likes and dislikes, and the chef grunted his understanding. "It shall be done. I need to go to the market right now, so is there anything else?" Michael asked tersely. Balthazar pictured the man scowling into the darkness with his phone pressed against his ear. "No, I think that's it. But as I said, this is to impress my lover's parents," Balthazar explained again. "I'm not sure if they'll like me, so they must be lubricated with good food and even better wine to make this work." The very thought of alcohol right now had his stomach roiling, but he was certain that after another few bags of blood and a good night's sleep, and perhaps his back being washed by a certain fledgling, he would feel quite recovered by tomorrow night, or tonight, rather, as it was already near dawn. The skin between his shoulder blades prickled as it always did when the sun touched the horizon. "Have I ever let you down?" Michael asked. "No, you haven't. But I know this is very last minute, and I consider it a challenge. Don't worry, Balthazar. Your lover's parents will be eating out of your hands, almost literally tonight," the chef said, and rang off. Balthazar went over to the small refrigerator in the corner of his room and took out 2 more bags of blood. Again, he ripped them open with his teeth and drank them both down. He grimaced. Cold blood was disgusting. His mouth tasted of sour metal. He poured himself a glass of water and drank that down too. He really needed a breath mint. Well, luckily, there was a roll of mints in the top drawer of his dresser. He popped 2 into his mouth and crunched them. He took a third for extra measure, followed by another chaser of water. The headache was getting better. Now it was just a low, dull throb that ran down the back of his neck into his spine, and his breath didn't smell like a carnivore's. No more corpse powder. Not for a while, anyways. He gave a mirthless smile as he hoped that Arceus decided to drink it and suffer like he had. He heard the splash of water against ceramic, and knew that Christian was being as good as his word and drawing his bath. The bathroom door was half open. Christian had turned off the bathroom lights, but lit the many fat white candles that Balthazar had previously placed strategically around the bathroom. He loved nothing more than bathing in candlelight. There was something so soothing about it compared to modern electric lights, even on rheostats that couldn't be replaced. It seemed to slow him down. It didn't remind him of his first life when candles and gas were the only lights. He rarely thought back on that time, but somehow candlelight made things simpler for him. Electricity was wonderful, and he wouldn't want it to be gone, but it was fast-paced and made him move at that same speed. He lit the candles on the bedside tables and clicked off the lights in the bedroom too, before padding towards the bathroom's door. He expected to see a fully clothed Christian seated on the edge of the tub with his fingers in the stream of water from the faucet, testing the temperature. This was actually enough of a dream for him not to fantasize further. Christian was exactly how he had pictured, except he was wearing only one of Balthazar's silk robes, a pale green one. The robe only came down to Christian's knees, showing his shapely calves. It was loosely belted too, exposing a great deal of his fledgling's muscled chest.
"You'll catch flies if you let your mouth hang open like that,"
Christian said, without turning to face him. Balthazar shut his mouth with an audible click. He hadn't realized it had fallen open. Right. Very old-fashioned sentiment there, fledgling. Christian did turn his head towards him this time. There was a delightful blush on his cheekbones, and his gaze was almost shy.
Something my grandmother used to say. I have to admit that your reaction to seeing me like this is quite gratifying.
Is this, I suppose, it's unexpected, but pleasant. Absolutely, wonderfully pleasant and unexpected, and
You've lived 200 years, had countless lovers, and yet I'm still able to make you speechless. You must like me very much.
Christian remarked as he went back to testing the water. The blush that crawled down his throat and disappeared beneath the robe showed that despite his cool words, he was more than moved by Balthazar's reaction. "I'm more than like you, Christian," Balthazar said simply. Christian stared at the water.
Yes.
"I didn't fully understand what it would mean to have a fledgling." Balthazar forced the words out. "I just assumed all the adoration came from the fledgling side. Not that you adore me, not that you—" Christian's head lowered, and he could see the swan-like curve of his neck. It was so vulnerable, so fragile, but he remained silent, listening intently to what Balthazar was saying. So he went on. "I just assumed there must be no feelings from the master's side. I mean, other than naturally grew between two people. But that's not true. I'm not compelled to feel this about you, but this bond between us. You're a part of my soul. So how could you treat a person who is part of your soul like Roan did me and the others?" It said far more than he intended to say, so he shut his mouth again. He swallowed deeply. What he had told Christian was the truth. He'd assumed that all the magic was on the one side and not the other. How could Roan torture them like he did if he had felt even a fraction of what Balthazar did for Christian? He was more broken than I understood if he did, Balthazar thought. If what I feel for Christian is normal between a master and fledgling, then Roan shouldn't have been able to do what he did to me and the others, not without something being truly wrong with him. Christian turned back towards him. His silver eyes, just like Balthazar's and every other vampire's, except for Damon's and Julian's, studied his face carefully. There was tenderness in that gaze, understanding too. Christian might be young in vampire years, but he was far more in tune than most 28-year-olds were, than perhaps even 200-year-old vampires are.
I have to remind myself to not think every person who cares for me is like David, that they could be more like Julian or my parents.
Christian murmured.
So I understand how confusing it is to feel one thing but to expect another, especially when that expectation is negative but the reality is positive.
"I would have killed David, just like I did Roan to keep you safe," Balthazar said steadily. Christian's head jerked up.
No, I didn't want him dead. I just wanted him to stop. But he couldn't. He lost everything, so he was beyond desperate. He needed to make that loss mean something. I had to be worth everything he'd lost. Don't you see? He had to justify to himself why he'd done what he'd done.
"What he did had nothing to do with you," Balthazar said firmly. "People like that aren't well, Christian. It's not that you aren't worthy of great love or even obsession, but nothing David did was your fault, and what happened to him, while tragic, was a result of his own choices." Christian reached and turned off the water. The tub was perfectly filled so that two people could slip underneath the water and not have it overflow. Christian remained sitting on the edge of it, though, staring at the water, his fingers skimming the heated surface.
I normally don't move quickly in life. I had to think about things, study all the angles, consider all the consequences. Becoming a vampire was not something I got to choose. I mean, I did choose it. You asked me, and I consented.
Christian quickly amended. "Heath and Celine didn't give you any choice. Didn't give Julian any choice either. I am the master of this house, and that is my fault," Balthazar said, and his lips flattened. This betrayal had gone on under his nose. He didn't like it. There might be other people that were traitors, and he had to figure out who those people were. He would be questioning everyone. "I cannot tell you how sorry I am. I wanted you to become one of us. I fully intended to approach you at some point, but not like this. Never like this." Christian lifted his head, and there was a surprising small smile on his lips.
I don't regret it, Balthazar. Being a vampire is quite amazing. When I think of all the advantages I have now, the disadvantages too, but there's so much to learn, so much to experience, so much to explore. Speaker to the dead. Forget David for a moment. What if I can reach Einstein, or Galileo, or Hawking? All that knowledge they have. In some ways, I can't wait to start. Forget the fear, just embrace this. That's what I want to do.
Christian stood up and faced Balthazar. His hands went to the robe's tie at his waist, and he undid it. My dearest acolytes, I regret to inform you that this podcast has been edited to conform to this platform's rules and regulations. Obviously, sexy vampire interludes are not appreciated by these plebeians. This episode has been cut to be acceptable to audiences of all ages. Not to worry, if you are interested in hearing the full episode with all the steamy parts included, you can purchase a monthly membership at wraithrain.com. Not ready to commit to a monthly membership? Then please visit the shop at wraithrain.com, where the full episodes are available for sale in audiobook format. Join us next time for episode 48, Perceptions. The Everdark podcast by Ex Aratare is performed by Edward Fox, Adam Riley, Jay Thelis, Bruno Devant, Kelly Michaels, and Hannah Hart, with Liz Gentle as Seer. Edited by Matthew Prince, continuity by Adrielle Wiggins. Everdark is produced by Wraith Rain Publishing in association with Her Grace Reed Studios. Copyright 2022 by Wraith Rain Publishing.